Stop the tape. Dr. Phil's hand shot up, cutting through the studio like a blade. The cameras stuttered to a halt. The audience fell silent. On stage, a woman sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, her hands trembling around a sealed envelope she just pulled from her purse. I need everyone to understand something, Dr. Phil said, his voice dropping to that tone he reserved for moments when the show stopped being a show and became something else entirely. What we're about to hear changes everything. What happened in the next 17 minutes would become the most watched episode in Dr. Phil history. 48 hours earlier, the producers had booked what seemed like a straightforward case. Sarah Mitchell, 32, was coming on the show with her elderly mother, Patricia, 67, to resolve a family dispute about inheritance. Patricia claimed Sarah had manipulated her into changing her will. Sarah insisted she was only trying to protect her mother from her abusive brother, David. It was familiar territory. Dr. Phil had mediated hundreds of similar family conflicts. The production team had done their standard background checks, gathered documents, interviewed both parties separately. Everything seemed routine. Sarah arrived at the studio that Tuesday morning wearing a simple blue dress, her blonde hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She looked like any other guest, nervous, hopeful, ready to tell her side of the story. Patricia sat beside her in the green room, silent and withdrawn, avoiding eye contact. The show began normally. Dr. Phil walked onto the stage to his signature music, greeted the audience, introduced the case. Today we have a mother and daughter locked in a battle over money and trust, he said, settling into his chair across from them. Patricia, you believe your daughter manipulated you. Sarah, you say you were protecting your mother. Let's start at the beginning. But nobody in that studio knew that Sarah Mitchell had been carrying a secret that would detonate everything they thought they knew. Sarah spoke first, her voice steady. Dr. Phil, I've spent the last 10 years taking care of my mother. When my father died, I moved back home. I gave up my career, my relationships, everything to be there for her. And now she's accusing me of stealing from her. Patricia interrupted, her voice sharp. You isolated me from my friends. You convinced me my son was dangerous. You got me to sign papers I didn't understand. Dr. Phil leaned forward. Sarah, did you isolate your mother from her support system? I protected her from people who were hurting her, Sarah said. My brother has a history of violence. That's a lie. Patricia's voice cracked. David never hurt anyone. You turned me against my own son. You poisoned our relationship. And then you. She stopped, her hands shaking. Dr. Phil's eyes narrowed. Something was off. He'd done this long enough to sense when the narrative didn't add up. Patricia, what were you about to say? The older woman looked at her daughter, then back at Dr. Phil. I don't even know if I can believe anything anymore. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil turned to Sarah. Help me understand something. Your mother is accusing you of very serious things. But I'm looking at her body language, and I'm seeing fear. Not anger, fear. What is she afraid of? Sarah's composure cracked just slightly. Her fingers gripped the armrest of her chair. She's confused. The medication she's on, it affects her memory. I'm not confused, Patricia shouted. I know what I saw. I know what you... She stopped again, tears filling her eyes. Dr. Phil stood up. The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't following the expected script. Patricia, I need you to tell me what happened. Not what you think I want to hear. Not what anyone told you to say. What actually happened? The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 15. 20. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every micro-expression, every breath. Then Sarah reached into her purse. She pulled out a white envelope, sealed and thick. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Dr. Phil, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Before we go any further, there's something you need to know. Dr. Phil looked at the envelope, then at her face. Years of experience told him that whatever was in that envelope was about to change the entire trajectory of this conversation. "What is that?" Sarah's next words came out in a rush. "I'm not Sarah Mitchell." Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Dr. Phil's voice was calm, but his posture had shifted completely. He was no longer a talk show host. He was a clinical psychologist dealing with something he hadn't anticipated. "My name isn't Sarah," the woman repeated louder this time. "I'm Jennifer Carson. I met the real Sarah Mitchell 6 years ago at a grief counseling group. She had just lost her mother. I had just lost mine. We became friends. And when she told me about her inheritance, about the money her mother had left her, about the family she'd left behind because they were toxic." She trailed off. Patricia let out a sound, half gasp, half sob. "Oh my God!" "Stop the tape," Dr. Phil said again, this time to the control room. "Stop everything." The cameras shut off. The audience began to murmur, confused. Dr. Phil motioned to his producers. "Clear the audience. Get security. And somebody call." He looked at the woman who said she was Jennifer. "Where is Sarah Mitchell?" Jennifer's face crumpled. "I don't know. I haven't seen her in 4 years." Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. What happened next wasn't captured by the main studio cameras, but the backup security feed would later show Dr. Phil doing something he'd never done in 40 years of television. He sat down on the floor next to Jennifer, eye level, and spoke to her like a human being, not a host. "Jennifer, I need you to help me understand what happened. Not for the show. For Patricia. For yourself. For whatever comes next. Can you do that?" Jennifer nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I never meant for it to go this far. Sarah and I looked similar. Same height, same build. She showed me pictures of her family, people she hadn't seen in years. Her mother had died when Sarah was young. Patricia was her father's second wife. Sarah had never even met her. So when Sarah's father died and left everything to Patricia, Sarah got nothing," Dr. Phil said slowly, piecing it together. "And you saw an opportunity. Sarah was struggling. Broke. Alone. I offered to help her. I said I'd pretend to be her, go to Patricia, build a relationship, convince her to include Sarah in the will. Split the inheritance. Sarah was desperate enough to agree." Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper. "But then Sarah disappeared. She stopped answering my calls. Her apartment was cleared out. I panicked. I'd already been pretending to be her for months. Patricia believed I was her stepdaughter. I thought if I just kept going, maybe I could fix it. Maybe I could find Sarah. Maybe you could keep the money." Dr. Phil finished quietly. Jennifer didn't deny it. She just handed him the envelope. "This is everything. The real paperwork. My real identity. Sarah's last known address. Everything I should have brought forward months ago." Dr. Phil stood up, the envelope in his hand. He looked at Patricia, who was being comforted by a producer. Then he looked back at Jennifer. "You understand what this means? You've been committing fraud. Elder abuse. Impersonation. When I hand this over to the authorities, and I will, you're looking at serious criminal charges." "I know," Jennifer said. "I'm ready. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming." Dr. Phil called the studio back to order. The audience returned, confused but riveted. The cameras rolled again. Patricia sat with a blanket around her shoulders, a victim's advocate by her side. Jennifer sat alone, makeup running, the envelope now open on the table between them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Phil addressed the camera directly, "what you're about to witness is not entertainment. This is real. This woman," he gestured to Jennifer, "came on this show under false pretenses. She has admitted to defrauding this family. But before we turn this over to law enforcement, I want to understand one thing." He turned to Jennifer. Why did you tell the truth? You could have kept the lie going. You could have walked out of here today, and nobody would have known. Why stop now? Jennifer looked at Patricia. Because she called me daughter. Last week, on the phone, she said I love you, daughter. And I realized she actually loved me. Not Sarah. Me. The imposter. The fake. She loved someone who didn't exist. And I couldn't let her love a lie anymore. The studio was silent. Dr. Phil let the moment breathe, let the weight of it settle. Patricia, he said gently, do you have anything you want to say? The older woman looked at Jennifer with an expression too complex to name. Anger, yes. Betrayal, absolutely. But something else too. Something that looked almost like grief. I should hate you, she said. But all I feel is empty. You weren't trying to steal money. You were trying to steal love. And that's worse. That's so much worse. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Dr. Phil called for a break. Behind the scenes, he made 3 phone calls. One to the police, one to a defense attorney he trusted to ensure Jennifer had proper representation, and one to a private investigator who specialized in missing persons cases. We're going to find Sarah Mitchell, he told Jennifer. And you're going to face the consequences of what you've done. But I'm also going to make sure you get help. Because this isn't just fraud. This is someone who was so desperate for family, for belonging, that you became someone else entirely. And that tells me something broke in you a long time ago. When the cameras rolled again, Dr. Phil addressed the audience. Folks, we're in uncharted territory here. The show you came to see today isn't the show you're getting. What you're witnessing is what happens when desperation meets opportunity meets human need. Jennifer Carson is going to face legal consequences. But she's also going to get psychological help. Because both things can be true. She can be guilty, and she can be suffering. He turned to Patricia. And you're going to get the truth about what happened to Sarah Mitchell. I'm personally funding an investigation. Whatever it takes. The envelope on the table stayed there throughout the rest of the taping, a physical reminder that truth, once revealed, can't be sealed back up. In the days that followed, the episode went viral. Ethicists debated whether Dr. Phil had handled it correctly. Legal experts analyzed the implications. Mental health professionals weighed in on Jennifer's psychology. But more than anything, people couldn't stop talking about the moment Jennifer said, she loved someone who didn't exist. 6 months later, the private investigator found Sarah Mitchell. She was alive, living in Oregon under a different name, struggling with addiction and homelessness. When she heard what Jennifer had done, her reaction wasn't anger. It was numbness. I sold my identity for $5,000, she told the investigator. I signed the papers. I thought it would just be for a month, maybe 2. Then I couldn't face what I'd done, so I ran. Dr. Phil brought both women back for a follow-up episode. Jennifer had been sentenced to probation and restitution, conditional on completing therapy. Sarah had entered rehab. Patricia sat between them, older and wearier, but somehow more solid. I'm not interested in revenge, Patricia said. I'm interested in understanding. And maybe, somehow, finding a way forward. The show ended not with resolution, but with process. Dr. Phil arranged for ongoing therapy for all 3 women. He set up a trust to ensure Patricia wouldn't be financially exploited again. He connected Sarah with long-term addiction recovery resources. And he gave Jennifer something she'd been seeking her whole life without knowing it, accountability wrapped in compassion. The legacy of that episode lived on in ways the producers never anticipated. It became required viewing in psychology programs studying identity disorders. Law schools used it to teach ethics in media. And tens of thousands of viewers reached out to share their own stories of desperation, of becoming someone they weren't, of the lies that grew too big to contain. Dr. Phil kept the envelope. It sat in his office, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do on television is stop being television and start being human. Inside that envelope wasn't just documents and evidence. It was the moment someone chose truth over comfort, consequence over continued deception. And for Patricia, who had loved a daughter who wasn't her daughter, who had been betrayed by kindness itself, there was something else in that envelope, the beginning of understanding that love, even when directed at an illusion, is still real. The grief of losing that illusion is still valid. And the work of rebuilding afterward is still worth doing. The show that was supposed to be about inheritance became about identity. The woman who came to be judged became someone who judged herself. And the host who was supposed to mediate became a witness to the moment when a lie crumbled and, in its collapse, revealed something true about human need, human frailty, and human courage. In the end, the envelope stayed sealed in everyone's memory not as evidence of crime, but as proof that even our worst choices can lead us, eventually, to our most honest moments. Years later, when asked about that episode, Dr. Phil would say, "Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't maintaining a lie, it's having the strength to destroy it yourself."